Well, good afternoon, or good morning, or good evening, my lovely students. It's time to say goodbye to China. It's time to say hello to India. This is without a doubt my favorite topic. I love talking about the Indian subcontinent, so y'all are going to have to buckle up and bear with me because I get pretty animated on this topic. Okay, the Indian subcontinent, we have two essential questions that we're going to be dealing with. Number one, what impact did geography have on the settling of the Indian subcontinent? And just a little tip, it's going to be pretty significant. And then finally, what were the two groups, the two primary migrators to the Indian subcontinent? You know, how'd they get there? Where'd they come from? What impact did they have? So these are the two questions: impact of geography and what two groups came to the Indian subcontinent early on. All right, now this is something that's really important. South Asians, people from the Indian subcontinent, are different than other Asians. They look different. Their culture's different, and there's a reason for this isolation. It has everything to do with geography. Now, if you look at the Indian subcontinent, the reason it's called a subcontinent is because it hangs down below the rest of Asia. It's kind of like like a piece of pie or something like that. You know, you have the Arabian Sea over here, you have the Bay of Bengal down here, you have the Indian Ocean down here. But we're going to talk about these two amazing mountain ranges, the Himalayas and the Hindu Kush, which I'll explain about more in the really near future. But what these natural barriers did is they isolated India, the Indian subcontinent, from the rest of Asia, and to a large extent from the rest of the world. Okay, I love this picture, man. When we're talking about the Himalayas, and just drop you back here a second, the Himalayas is this mountain range right here. We're talking about the Himalaya Mountains. Just above the Himalaya Mountains is also the barren plateau of Tibet. The Himalayas are just spectacular. These are the highest mountains in the world. Take the Rocky Mountains, and you're looking at about 30,000 or 15,000 feet. The Himalaya Mountains are twice that. The Himalaya Mountains get up to almost 30,000 feet. Mount Everest is 29,800 or something like that. One thing you have to understand about these mountains is it wasn't until 1953 that someone even climbed Mount Everest. That's how hard it is. That's what significant barriers they actually are. So you lose about, I don't know, a little more than 3 degrees for every 1,000 feet you climb. So if you're talking about being 30,000 feet up, you're talking about being over 100 degrees colder than you would at sea level. And that's just one of the factors. Also, the oxygen is so thin up there, you need equipment to survive. So the Himalaya Mountains are probably, on land, the most formidable natural barrier in the world. And just to the east of the Himalaya Mountains are the Hindu Kush range. And the Hindu Kush range, I'll go back here for a second. I'll show you where the Hindu Kush are. The Hindu Kush would be right over here, in between Pakistan and Afghanistan. The Hindu Kush are not much smaller. I mean, some of the Hindu Kush mountains top out at over 25,000 feet. So we're talking the second highest mountain range in the world. So the highest Himalayas are on one side, and the Hindu Kush, the second highest, are on the other. These are significant barriers between the subcontinent and the rest of the world. But when you look at India, most of the migration, most of the influence is actually going to come from the West, from Africa and Central Asia and Europe. These boundaries walled off East Asia from the subcontinent. So the influences, the primary influences to India are going to come from the West. Now, this is another very important concept that you have to get down when you're talking about India and Indian geography. It's this concept of the monsoons. Now, all monsoon means is seasonal winds. And if you look at this map, there's some red arrows down here, and there's some green arrows up here. What happens in the winter months is there's really only two seasons. There's a hot, dry season and a hot, wet season. So there's lots of moisture, lots of heat, I should say. When the green arrows, when the wind shifts from, when the winds become northerly winds, meaning coming from the north, they sweep down off the plateau of Tibet, which averages about 15,000 feet. That's how high the plateau of Tibet is. They drop over the Himalaya mountains and they bring cool, dry air to the Indian subcontinent. It's during the summer months, or in the winter months. In the summer months, the wind shifts and comes up out of the Arabian Sea and brings all the rainfall. So there's really two. There's a dry season and a wet season, and both those seasons are pretty warm. But these monsoon winds they bring life-giving moisture to the Indian subcontinent, and they're very significant in Indian culture. So let's talk about these patterns of migration. The first migration that we're going to talk about is the African migration. And this goes back, geez, probably 100,000 years ago. It's kind of funny, most anthropologists will trace humanity back to Africa. There was this thing called the Genome Project a number of years ago, and I had this kind of nerdy friend that I really liked, and I didn't know what to get him for his birthday, so I got him a genome kit from National Geographic, in which you take a sample of your spit and you send it in there, and they tell you where your ancestors immigrated from. And I spent like $100, and it came back and said you're from Africa. Like everybody's from Africa. Hallelujah. So, but it had more to it than that. I don't want to diss that gift too much. It was really actually cool, the migration patterns that it showed. But this migration pattern is significant. From the central part of Africa, people worked their way across the Arabian Peninsula, across the Red Sea, and down along the coast and settled in southern India, right down here. And this migration probably started about 100,000 years ago and took place over a long period of time. What's interesting today, if you go to India, there is a natural division between north and south. It's a cultural division, it's a climate division, but southern Indians tend to be darker complected. And I'll show you some examples of that as we go through. Northern Indians tend to be lighter complected, and we're going to show you their immigration pattern here momentarily. But the first great migration to the Indian subcontinent was from Africa. Now this one's a fascinating one. I know this picture's a little blurry, but it is just a fascinating topic. Right here in far western Asia, in an area today that will be part of Russia or Kazakhstan. Here is the Black Sea right here. Here's the Caspian Sea right here. This is the Caucasus Mountains right here. The word Caucasian, white people, comes from this mountain range. So this area right here, excuse me before the bell, the area above the Caucasus Mountains, there's a group of nomads that lived there, 10,000 years ago, called Aryans. Aryans, yes. And Aryans were these people that would travel around and find food, and they loved to fight, and they were intense people. Now, you can see that they moved west into Europe, they moved across Siberia, but a significant number of them dropped right into India. And their influence on Indian culture is profound. With them comes the Hindu faith, which we're going to talk about extensively over the next week. Now, some of you might think Aryan, you might think of Adolf Hitler. Well, guess what? He was talking about the same people. These were the white supermen who moved all around the Eurasian landmass and dominated wherever they went. Now, you might ask the question, well, Sturdivant, you just said that the Hindu Kush and the Himalayas were virtually impenetrable, and they were, but there was a corridor, and it's called the Khyber Pass. And this migration, I should have explained this earlier, it really was significant about 1500 BCE. So this shows you the Indo-Aryan roots in 1500 BC, and there's this solid line that looks like it goes right through the mountains. And here's a break. Here it is, the Khyber Pass, and you can see the road meandering through. So some 3,500 years ago, these aggressive white nomadic invaders came pouring through this pass and settled the majority of India and influenced India tremendously to this day. Now the Khyber Pass is the historic route into the Indian subcontinent, and the Aryans were first. But later the Persians are going to come in around 500 BCE. Persia is what we associate with the country of Iran. The Greeks are going to come in 300 BCE. Alexander the Great came through the Khyber Pass. So this is a very significant entranceway into the Indian subcontinent, and it faces west, and that's significant. So the Khyber Pass and the Indian Ocean are the historic corridors into the subcontinent. The subcontinent is influenced by civilizations from the west, not the east. The river valley civilizations of China did not have influence on the Indian subcontinent. Their influence came from Africa and the Aryans, and later more Europeans, Greeks, Persians, and Central Europeans. However, this is very significant. Even though the migration patterns came mostly from the west, South Asians are going to have this metaphysical approach to life that is uniquely Asian. All right, guys, thanks very much.